The paradox of the paradise. In this video, I demonstrate that politicians fail to promote unity and equality in New Caledonia, and that's why I decided to create a social movement aiming to target all Caledonians in order to institute peace and unification at the eve of the referendum of 2014-2018. New Caledonia is a small island lost in the Pacific Ocean. It's divided into three parts: the southern province, the northern province, and the Loyalties Island on the right. An overview of the historical and political context is essential because to find appropriate solution to a problem, it is major to take it at its roots. Thereby, in the early 1980s, two parties were dominating the political arena in New Caledonia: the FLNKS, led by Jean-Marie Tjibaou, and the RPCR, led by Jacques Lafleur. The FLNKS expected a lot from the left-wing government elected in France in 1981. In 1984, the special status prepared for New Caledonia by the government strongly discontented the independentists. As a response, they decided to establish the provisory government of Kanaki. On the north of the island, Caldoche cattle farmers were chased out of their exploitations. In the late 1984, French troops started to arrive. On the other side, the FLNKS was preparing to resist. While French were doing their best to show their attachment to the Republic. Violence was rapidly escalating. In 1988, the drame d'Ouvéa occurred, where tens of people died from both sides. The leaders of the group could not control the extreme individuals basically supporting them. In 1988, Tjibaou and Lafleur agreed to sign the Matignon Accord in order to put an end to the conflict. Tjibaou was assassinated by an extremist independentist in May the same year. Because independentists knew that the referendum would reveal a majority of votes against the independence, the RPCR and the FLNKS negotiated new accords with the government. As a result, the Nouméa Accords were ratified after the referendum of 1998. The Nouméa Accord established a strong autonomy. It also instituted the Caledonian citizenship and the organization of a common destiny. All these measures aim to prepare for the coming referendum. We are now 3 years away from the referendum, and affronts have been taking place regularly, alarming the people and making the population everything but unified. Moreover, with the conservative medias dominated by RFO, commercial broadcasters and newspapers, critical and conservative analysis of the situation are not available. In June last year, the government threatened to cut the allocation given to the radio Océan FM because of their rubric rants, in which people can express their discontentment about the government. Luckily, strikes were organized and the radio kept its allocation. This, however, shows how media are controlled and how freedom of expression can be threatened at any time. Today, New Caledonia has the highest GDP of the Pacific region, but the repartition of wealth is very unequal. For example, the wage gap is highly visible as Melanesians earn 32% less money than non-Melanesians. On average, a couple spend $850 on food per month. What's more, 80% of the incarcerated population is Melanesian. So, only 34% of the Melanesians pass the baccalaureate, the French end of year 12 exam, compared to 79% of the Europeans. Also, the tax exemption system creates big issues regarding land holding and access to property. It also helps inflation, dig the gap between the wealthiest and the poorest groups, and gives more legitimacy for indigenous land claims and creates more grievances. In addition to that, the local financial system situation is actually close to an economic monopoly, as there is only one enterprise dealing with phone supply, internet supply, travel tickets, and only 3 enterprises owning supermarkets and car concessions. The repartition of wealth is clearly organized in order to benefit everyone except the wider population, to build infrastructures to access the mines, or for the Pacific Games that took place this year. The government spent $34 million. Moreover, when Sarkozy came for the opening ceremony of the Games, the local parliament decided to reconstruct only the road his car was supposed to take. He actually only used his helicopter to move around. The UFC What to Choose is a consumer association currently putting pressure on the political parties. Their demands include a better transparency of the VAT, a better price structure, and an increase of the fines as a dissuasion tool for the enterprises. No social or fiscal advantages provided to enterprises that did not respect their obligations. Measures dismantling monopolies and oligopolies, the development of a real public transport network as ecological as possible, the development of an efficacious taxi network, as there are only 3 taxis available in the whole countries per day. Politicians never replied to the letter nor implemented any of these demands. Rights formulated in the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People will as well be carefully examined as to respond to the demands of the chieftaincy supporters. Thereby, I identify particular elites, but also political and economical relationships as the cause of social problems and responsible for the imbalance in New Caledonia. According to Burroughs, the group will be practitioner of reformist and revolutionary actions. Now, let's have a look at the strategies. The idea is to establish a social movement that will have recourse to nonviolent actions in order to make politicians take faster and proper decisions and undermine the Caledonian monarchy. The group will promote the reforms proposed by the UFC, the rights defined in the UNDRIP, and enhance the need for social cohesion. We'll first choose the SMART goal setting. Then, take into account the consent theory of power, which argues that the elite's power depends on the cooperation of people, on extended resources of power, and on the degree of obedience. However, this theory has been criticized, and scholars have demonstrated that structure have a crucial role to play within social interactions. They permit the domination and power of elites, even if consent of people is withdrawn. Thereby, elites' power would collapse because of change in structures, not only because of the people's withdrawal of consent. And indeed, to understand New Caledonian issues, it is major to look at both consent, but also the social structure and systems, and highlight strategies that challenge the manifestation of power at the personal, group process, and political levels. A brief reference to the critique of the democratic peace theory is also crucial as it strongly encourages the use of grassroots voices to institute durable peace and stability. It is thus a matter of modifying the structures currently undermining social cohesion and creating unequal access to basic goods, services, and stability. To achieve these goals, we must examine the sources of power at the disposal of the elites. These are authority, human resources, skills and knowledge, intangible factors, material resources, and sanctions. Movement will focus on the teachers and workers as human resources, the skills and knowledge embodied by personnel, officers, and administrators, the intangible factors by raising consciousness, threatening the habits of obedience, and challenging political dogmas, try to regulate resources available to our opponent, and undermine their material resources. Finally, the sanction by making them a tool for the action. Our pillars of support will be the civil servants, the media, the youth, the workers, the religious organization, and the local NGOs. To sum up, the strategy will, in the short term, try to promote unity and create solidarity, and in the long term, trying to undermine the structures creating social inequalities and division. Finally, we need to organize the tactics. Obviously, these objectives won't be easy to achieve as they require a strong and lasting commitment from the pillars of support. However, through organized preparation and the wide contribution of people from all backgrounds, the movement could save us from extended violence in 2014-2018. Firstly, it is crucial to meet priests, teachers, students, workers, labor unions, community centers, bingo players, consumers and traffic control associations, farmers, artisans, and people working in small shops, to contact Radio Jido, Ocean FM, le chien bleu, find a name, and wear blue or a flower on the ear. Secondly, I'm going to examine the type of tactics and follow their strategic order. Three classes of tactics will be used: protest and persuasion, non-cooperation, and intervention. First, protest and persuasion. Posters must be put in strategic places, in the suburbs, the shops, meeting places, school, and gas station. Pickets must be organized with workers and teachers. It would also be possible to contact graph makers and ask them to graph in allowed places in the city about the group and the meetings. Non-cooperation. Find sanctuaries where people can see us, like beaches, public places, cafes, churches, bingo places. We can refuse to pay taxes, as the money is not spent for common advantages. Use civil disobedience, refuse to pay fines. Third, intervention. We are going to organize blockage and occupation of the busy road by making people leave their car on place, make them sit on the supermarket parkings, seeking imprisonment and overloading facilities. In the constructive program, we'll create a parallel market system by bartering goods and services. Ultimately, what is expected is the accommodation of our opponent after the use of combination of acts of omissions and commissions. Of course, some would argue that New Caledonia should stay French because without it, the system could collapse and result in a state failure situation like in Fiji or Vanuatu. Some other would argue that it must become independent because Kanaki deserves to be free and forget its colonial past. However, these two sides do not take into account the multiple ethnic groups, neither respect one another, nor propose any concrete solution against ethnic violence and disparities. All independentists are not Kanaks, and all loyalists are not Europeans. If the country becomes independent, some extremists would certainly want to chase whites and others out. This would result in a loss of identity for people like me and would engender as much suffering as did the colonial period. We should prevent violence by any means. Also, there are tens of countries we can cite to exemplify state failure, where unjust policies are applied, or else where everyone sees that there are tensions but nobody reacts. It is of a significant importance to look at the different countries that succeeded in the fields we are targeting. This project would require an intense preparation. It would, above all, link people together to find solutions together. There are a lot of Caledonian people like me who love Kanaki as much as France and cannot choose to belong to one or the other. New Caledonia is the only place we call home. The fear of people creates insecurity, which is creating violence. Fear and violence are vicious circles and must be prevented by any means. If you recognize yourself in what I've just said, join the movement for Unified Caledonia.